Parag, thank you so much for joining Doha Debate.
My pleasure.
So, first of all, let's crack on with the basics. What do you describe as globalization? Because everyone seems to have their own idea.
They shouldn't, because globalization really shouldn't have many definitions. It encompasses many, many things, maybe an infinite number of things, but it should be defined as the movement of goods, people, services, data, ideas, technologies, from place to place. It doesn't have to be across an international boundary, right? Globalization predates boundaries, political boundaries, by hundreds of thousands of years, right? So the movement of things around the world is globalization. Most of all, let's remember people. Right? The original globalization is us, our migrations.
When we talk about migration and we look at sort of the border between America and Mexico, or here at our coastal lines across Europe, there's a lot to be said about the fact that the global north is very happy to receive cheap goods, cheap money, but not people. How does that play into a globalized world when we value some bits of it more than others?
It's actually not fair to generalize about the whole Western world, right? If you look at Canada right now, Canada is importing 1% increase in its own population every single year, which translates into 350,000 new Canadian residents every year, willingly, happily. America, over the last 200 years, has been a very successful immigrant society, right? Integrating tens of millions of people. So whatever is happening right now in the politics of, say, Germany or France or Italy or the UK, to me is literally a blip. There are many tragedies associated with migration over thousands of years, but we would not have the very polyglot, interracial societies that we live in right now here in the Western world, North America and Europe, were it not for the fact that there much more migration has happened than not happened in terms of the number of people who have the means and the ability to come. They have been coming.
Do you just have to be like lesser of all evils about it? Like the ends justifies the means about it when it comes to globalization?
It depends on what you mean by the ends, right? To me, globalization is not an end in itself. It's just something that has been happening for many, many millennia. I'm not saying it's good or it's bad. I'm saying it's human. We have been building infrastructure, roads or pipelines or railways or airports for centuries, right? This is something that is who we are. So it's not about ends justifying means at all. We need to accept that we are always building connectivity and using it to spread around the world and to move things or money or ideas or technologies around the world. So it's not about right or wrong, good or bad, ends or means. So why don't we reflect on it and make sure that we're harnessing this incredible process for maximum human benefit?
What are some of the greatest benefits of globalization?
Obviously, the enrichment of human society in terms of economic growth and welfare, the spread of technology and ideas, right? Every one of these things requires globalization. Every phone call you make to someone around the world is globalization. The thing is that with a lot of people today, the first thing they think of when they make a phone call with a wireless phone is they think of connectivity as something that is wireless, that's just in the ether. It's not. It requires that we have built this infrastructure of globalization to enable the seamless connectivity that we have around the world today. There is something incredibly virtuous about that. You know, the things that you can do today in terms of reaching any other, any part of the planet in less than, say, 36 hours, right? Or contacting any other human being in the world with one phone call, right? Those are some of the accomplishments of globalization. And it is way too much to quantify. There have been studies that have tried to figure out if you could put a dollar value on just the highway network in one country, right? What share of their economy has grown as a result of that? You can't. You can't even measure all of the secondary and third order kind of benefits of just building a road. It's unquantifiable how beneficial building infrastructure is around the world.
A local government, a council, a borough, a state, a province can do just that. That's got nothing to do with globalization, but it's just when you add them all up cumulatively that you and I can drive down the road here in Edinburgh where we are, but we didn't build that road. It's got nothing to do with us using it. That happened here of itself on a local level.
We stopped living in a world where everything could be measured purely locally in about somewhere during the 19th century. There's almost no part of the world left where you could say, I took local resources, built a local thing, and I can measure an exact local currency, what the value is and benefit is to that local community. Because nowadays, the asphalt you use to build a road may have come from somewhere else. The workers probably came from another country, and all of these sorts of things, right? So, the car that you drove on obviously wasn't made here, and all of these other things. So we don't live in that world anymore. Yes, I strongly believe in the local. To me, globalization is connections between localities. Right?
Can you tell me what that means?
That means that, again, someone who is a migrant worker on the other side of the planet from where they're from is able to reach home with a phone call, send money back via mobile payments and remittances. All of those things happen, again, because of some form of globalization, right? So it is about the local benefits of people having migrated, moved, globalized in some way.
What are some of the costs to globalization that you feel should not be paid?
Globalization has enormous costs associated with it. A lot of them are horribly negative, right? If we didn't need paper, if we didn't all have to jam hundreds of reams of paper into our printers and print documents, or the plastic straws that we drink from and all of the other day-to-day resources that we consume, obviously we wouldn't have to plunder the rainforest as much as we do, right? We get on a plane and fly so seamlessly, right? That has costs, right, to the climate. So there is a positive and a negative dimension to everything that's associated with globalization.
What in a globalized network, in a globalized world, is just the cost is too much to bear and the burden is unfairly distributed. What do you think, because you mentioned climate change a few times, I'm interested by that. What do you think is the cost of globalization that we shouldn't be paying? What shouldn't we be doing?
It's a great question, but the thing is that globalization is not actually all things, the same thing to the same people in the same place. You talk about climate change as if we're all feeling it equally. The sad thing is the reason you don't have a global climate agreement where all countries say, yes, let's put a stop to this, is because there are winners and losers from climate change, right? Why do Russia, Canada, and these other countries in the high Arctic that are big oil producers, they don't really care about their climate commitments?
Globalization
right?
did this.
I'm not saying globalization did this. I'm saying that you're not going to have global agreement on how to regulate a lot of things if you depend on, governments agreeing on things, because they're winners and losers from this dimension of globalization, and therefore you're not able to control the consequences in a comprehensive global way. So you have to make local changes if you want to stop negative global sort of bad things from happening. And this is why we should be paying attention to and reporting on and encouraging the local activism. And by the way, you see climate activism, right, all over these countries. We focus, again, way too much on what happened at this diplomatic summit, that diplomatic summit. To me, it is about the Chinese protesters who say, wait a minute, why are you doing this, plastic dump here in our town? That's one of the things that's going on, right now, for example. So it really does have to start at the local level.
Is globalization just an excuse for the global north to export all of its problems and the things it doesn't want to the global south?
Except for the fact that it's been the best thing that ever happened to the global south, right? Which is sort of true. I mean, if you look at the last 20 years of economic growth and integration into the world economy, and a lot of the benefits, and whether it's technologies, consumer goods, and other practices that have been adopted in parts of Africa and Latin America, it's because of globalization, right? It's because of their economies no longer being exploited in a colonial fashion the way they were through the mid-20th century, and the kind of expiration of the Cold War relationships that also suppressed many of these countries. And so it's really in the last 25 years, 30 years, where you can say that there are a lot of underdeveloped countries of the South, a lot of post-colonial countries, that finally get to make their own decisions about how they're going to participate in the world. We still live in a very unequal world economically. We still live in a very stratified world in terms of the power that countries have. But when a country in sub-Saharan Africa is able to sell their their crops and their output to Asian countries and not be dependent only on their former European colonial masters, That's because of globalization. Please thank globalization for that, for the money it brought in, for the new technologies it brought in, for the enhanced output, for the distribution of revenues, for the new farms that were able to grow, for the schools that they were able to build that money. You better thank globalization for that.
All right, I'm going to give it a small thank you. Thank you, globalization. Just
a really,
one.
really big one. And in all of these conversations about globalization, so often it's about, again, these amorphous global forces, the corporations, the empires. Let's talk about local decision making.
Parag Khanna, thank you so much for talking to me.
Thank you.